Okay, well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I've been a regional practitioner. I came to the Regional Studies Association rather late in my career. I've been mostly involved with the American Planning Association. But I was wondering, and I worked in Regional Planning District Commission in Virginia, which is going to be the experience here that I'm going to share with you. Now, when I started out the paper here, what I wanted to focus on was the need for enabling legislation. In the world of action where local governments actually do things, things are very formal. And when I did my original research for my master's thesis in 1972, I was told by a gentleman I interviewed that you had to look, planners had to pay attention to what was in the Code of Virginia. Virginia is a Dillon Rule state, so what you do or can't do, it has to be in the Code of Virginia. So in preparing for the paper, in proposing this, I gave the Regional Cooperation Challenge in that jargon there. Codified sub-state political sovereignties require enabling legislation for effective multi-jurisdictional program implementation. So that is kind of the mud. But it's really, what I'm giving you is the Virginia experience. And now the map, but my paper I think turned into a book. So I will give you 30 minutes of as far as I've gotten, and hopefully it will increase the dialogue and maybe give you some perspective on what it's like on the ground working with elected officials, working with state assemblies, working with congressional people and senators. So as a regional planner, I've had to work with all levels of elected officials and citizens. Now, the terminology, Virginia is a unique state in that cities are independent from the counties. This was put in place in 1880 or 1890 under the rationale that cities were different than counties and they needed a separate form of government. So in Virginia, this map shows the independent cities, which are totally separate from their counties. Now, if you live in a town, the town is part of the county. So there's a precision in language in a state that I find a little muddy in the study, in political science and city study, where urbanization is kind of a muddy word. It covers a lot of territory. And metropolitan itself is also muddy, because and metropolitan is, in the United States for certain, is not all urbanized area. And if you have a metropolitan planning organization, which is the transportation planning function, the metropolitan area that it covers is not the same metropolitan area as the metropolitan statistical area. So again, I understand the language in the academic world, but there's a big gap in many respects when you get on the ground and you're trying to do something. So I want to begin here by just kind of stating what I see, the gap between the vision and the design. So regional visionaries project there's increased metropolitan area and rural region economic success through cross-boundary coordination, cooperation, and collaboration by regional leaders in sub-state and multi-state districts. But the design is, state and local governments are designed and organized to work within their boundaries. And working across boundaries actually goes against that design. Now here's a caveat. that in the United States, though, the boundaries are not to impede interstate commerce or in-state commerce. So we get to move freely about the country. And so the boundaries are porous for trade, but the boundaries actually have consequence. When you go from one county to the next, the rules change. There's zoning setbacks. There are all these little changes. So there are consequences when you cross a political boundary, but they're pretty much invisible to most people as we pass through time. So I'm going to go way out here on a limb, and I'm going to conclude that the United States, in fact, is regional by design. But again, we acknowledge that when you cross boundaries, rules are going to change, but we can deal with that. And in fact, in Virginia, which is a Dillon Rule state, a General Assembly member said, really why the General Assembly, they didn't want the localities developing too many rules and too many differences that would impede commerce. So the General Assembly wanted to keep an eye on the locality, so they weren't wanting to establish toll booths and passports and things like that, which if you talk to local governments, there are plenty of them that would like to do that, secede and create their own boundaries. So when I was looking for the proper regional scale, because I was told in 98 that the regional councils and sub-state districts that the United States has, that they're all the wrong regions. So I went to geography to look for what the proper regional scale was. Again, I came up through urban affairs and planning and wasn't a geographer. And so I learned from the European and Asian perspective that, well, an American state is simply a semi-autonomous region. Now, not many Americans would want to consider a state that, but in fact, that's the case. And when we're looking at development, the governor of the state is in fact now, and maybe has been for quite a while, the chief economic development officer. Many governors, Governor Cuomo in New York has created economic regions, and so it's not uncommon for governors to come in and promise economic development, and governors really like to cut ribbons. So the state is a region, but in our statistical regions, the major analytical unit is the metropolitan areas. Having worked in a rural area outside of the Washington metropolitan area, the MSA focus leaves out the non-metro counties. A major gap if you happen to live in one of those. But there's this alternative system of sub-state districts, most of which were created in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, called councils of governments or regional planning commissions. So there is, in each state, a regional political geography of elected officials who have been meeting and organizing and doing regional planning and strategic planning for quite a long time. But this network is invisible, and the emphasis on the metropolitan, I think this reflects kind of the regional urbanization that we just heard about, because every part of America wants to have the amenities of modern life. Virginia, in particular, I may just go back here. Virginia is a state that has a complete network of regional commissions that were well and effectively designed, which I'll go into that experience. But the alignment that they created, which I'm going to explain to you, the question is, has that alignment of governments created any measurable strategic benefit for Virginia? And that was an issue that I was trying to find an answer to And I did this very simple analysis looking at net earnings in the U.S. From 1960 to 2010. And to my surprise, I found that because I knew that Virginia had a strategic advantage by virtue of its regional commissions, that from 1960 to 2010, Virginia advanced from the 14th in net earnings in the United States to 9th. So all of these, of course, this violates all rules, too much data, but all the green states there advanced in their relative position. The little yellow band there, they stayed about the same, and the lower ones lost ground relative on this granted very gross measure. But again, I think it, and you can see that in the top tier, Minnesota, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, New Hampshire, Florida, Colorado, Georgia. Many of these states are states with complete systems of regional councils and regional networks. I think more work could be done in this area. I don't have the resources or the skills to do it, but I want to point out this as an area of productive research because it is this kind of regional urbanization. And in fact, in the 70s, when the planning districts were rolled out in Virginia, they used the term regional city. Okay, so here's our system, and I'm going to give you a very brief history of regional planning in Virginia. Because it was very much done as a means for economic and community development, very consciously. Now, I didn't get to Virginia until 1968. I grew up in Wisconsin. But there's a long history of embracing planning for economic development. They created a state planning board in 1933 as part for FDR's programs. They had proposed regional planning commissions in 1944, and they adopted the Metropolitan councils, encouraged that in the 50s. In 1966 is when they began to look with the Metropolitan Study Commission to design, to deal with urbanization in the Washington metropolitan area, in Richmond, in Tidewater, Norfolk. And there are a number of clear steps here that I'm going to go and give you a little bit more detail. But as a person who worked in this system beginning in 73, and having read the literature in regional studies, the mystery to me was what was the theoretical basis that the people that did this used? Because I couldn't find any. So they created the Metropolitan Area Study Commission in 1966. And here's the mission statement from Governor Godwin at the time, saying they were looking at the process of industrialization had rapidly accelerated in Virginia, causing concentration of population, which presented special and urgent governmental problems, and further recognizing that such problems must be regarded as problems of entire metropolitan areas comprising both cities and surrounding counties. So this was in 1966, and there was a buildup to that. So they'd recognized this issue, and they were establishing this Metropolitan Area Study Commission to come up with a way to solve that. A year later, the commission presented the Virginia Area Development Act, and as they studied this, they looked at the ACIR report of the time to find out what options there were on the table. And Virginia came out with the notion of a statewide system of defined planning districts with incentives for organizing commissions, and they created a new political subdivision for the Commonwealth. These commissions were going to be chartered by local governments, and that complete system remains in place today. The design, Weldon Cooper at the Virginia Institute of Government was on this commission and a staff member, and he did a history of the development of the ideas. The head of the commission was the president of Virginia Tech at the time, T. Marshall Hahn, and Hahn, who was a physicist, kind of forced a solution that was a little different than what the political science people of the Institute of Government had considered an optimum case. They were more going to favor consolidation, but that's not how the commission ended up. Now, a unique part about this act was the provision for the service district, which was a new unit of government that would be chartered after the Planning Commission developed its plan. It would be directly like the body, replace the Planning District Commission, and implement the plan that had been developed. So it would have been essentially a multi-purpose authority, because Virginia had experienced the limits of single-purpose authorities, which was and very often remains the only tool for multi-jurisdictional implementation. But this service district was not considered a regional government. So regional government in Virginia, well, Virginia in 1970 adopted an amended constitution, and in that constitution provided for regional government along with the definition of city, county, and town. So as shown here, they defined regional government means a unit of general government organized as provided by law within defined boundaries as determined by the General Assembly. So, I mean, that's just a little bit of vision on their part to have amended their constitution, provided for regional government in the future, and leaving that undefined. They also say in the Constitution here that when one of these organizations is created, there will be a referendum, so it'll be brought on by the people at their own. So I would say that a lot of vision was exercised 40 plus years ago in this design. So they're prepared for it, but at present they are doing well with the intergovernmental agreements that they've put in place. Now, when it came to the planning district implementation, the commission existed, came up with those ideas, and they tossed the ball to the state once the General Assembly passed it, and it was up to the state to delineate the planning districts. And the two people who were most involved in this, Ed Temple and Stan Kidwell, Ed was the director of the division there. Stan had been recruited from Georgia specifically because he had the experience of regional council, regional cooperation in Georgia. They had no off-the-shelf theory. Stan is 86 years old. I interviewed him recently, again, to confirm this. So they had met, they came up with criteria. Their goal was to aggregate counties to have 100,000 population, but they also said as a criteria they wanted a convenient meeting place for an hour's drive. And they came to a few places where they had to go below the 100,000 threshold. Of course, 100,000 population back in the 50s and 60s was that threshold. When a city reached that population, they started to have some amenities. So what the strategy they were using was to try to aggregate the counties to get an economy of scale and population that would enable some of these other things to happen. And then they met with all the local governments in Virginia and had them give input in terms of which region they were oriented to. So that included cities, counties, and towns, any of the towns over 3,500. That led to this map of the Virginia planning districts, which has held over time. When they started out, their goal was to have 20 regions. They ended up with 22. Later on, you see the one that's region number 23. That's the two sides of Hampton Roads that the General Assembly made come together later, sort of like the Metropolitan Area Council. So the Virginia system has been very adaptive. It's very flexible, and it creates significant benefits. But the alignment of them to make the departments use the same map, aggregate the data in the same way, very simple idea, but something that could only happen by the governor making it an order and giving the agencies 6 months to do it in. You will conform your sub-state districts to that map. That, what I would call, would be a stroke of genius, and Ed Temple had gone on to become the governor's chief of staff. So one of the things I have to do for my paper is submit a question to Governor Holton, who's in his 80s now, to see if he can stand to myself. We assume that it was Ed Temple, who had been a city manager and a public administrator, made that case for it. And Governor Holton himself, having been from Southwest Virginia, this was a very simple stroke of genius, because it made regional analysis in Virginia very simple. Okay, so the number 7 up there, Northern Shenandoah Valley, that's where I started work in 1973. It was quite easy to do regional analysis in Virginia. All the health departments, the area agencies on aging, everything was organized and follows these boundaries. So regional analysis was quite simple. And it wasn't until the 80s, when we were looking at multi-state regional analysis along the 81 corridor, I asked the census contact for Virginia, I said, can you give me the FIPS codes for the other regions in West Virginia and Maryland states? And he said, no, they don't have, there's no such thing as a regional FIPS code. And we just get to use our planning districts this way. So regional analysis in Virginia is quite simple, quite easy, as a consequence. So the sub-state district, as a basic public administration tool for state agencies, I think is well known, but is anybody advocating that you use that for smart growth? Governor Glendening from Maryland, when in his smart growth process, all he was trying to do, he told me, was just trying to get the state agencies to cooperate for the benefit of the localities. Okay, so the silos at the state level can prevent, or everybody's doing their own job. So having this direction to use the same geography is important. The Virginia design process gave good regions, and I think has been the success factor in the case of Virginia's sub-state district. But I think it also points out how the governor's leadership is vital, and I don't know anywhere that any people in the academic world or are talking to governors about, here's a way to make things better, use this experience. So that's why I'm offering it here in this setting. So the Virginia Strategic Advantage, while there's no set of perfect regional boundaries, the Virginia design then leads to regional communities. And so if we're looking for a language for this alternative to Metropolitan, I use the terminology beginning in the 90s of our region was a regional community of communities. It was a scale we went to when the local area was not big enough. So you didn't lose your local identity. We adopted this regional identity. And the geographic framework is of benefit to any group that wants to use that in the state. So again, it leads to regional communities, and these areas have regional intelligence. This alignment process, I think, can be continued to the regional elected officials we already have. Most states have a House and a Senate, and then you have congressional districts. If those districts align to the local governments and the regions, there will be additional benefit. And when the states are aligned, then you can do multi-regional analysis that isn't metropolitan and then everything that's left over. So, thank you. Well, actually, it was very effective. In Virginia, the school districts are the local governments. So, where the county governments were responsible for the school systems, they were not necessarily investment oriented. So you sort of cut the cities free to invest in infrastructure and education, whatever they wanted. So the last town that converted to a city and did it effectively was the Manassas, Virginia, where there was an IBM plant. And they wanted a good school system. But Prince William County, again, the rural county, there's quite a difference in urban values and rural values. So the people in the town of Manassas did an analysis. With all the money we're sending to Prince William County, if we were a city, we could invest that and have a great school system. Well, the Manassas school system is consistently in the top 10 for the country. So cities are different than counties. Cities are municipal corporations designed to deliver services. Counties are, so you have a courthouse and a sheriff and a deed. So you can become an urban county, with, as a progression. But urban city is different than rural county.
One more question? Well, in a sense, once you start with the idea that the states are regions, you miss the entire history of regionalism and regional planning in the United States, which has involved multi-state regionalism, like the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Appalachian Regional Authority. All of these have to do with finding ways. They're interjurisdictional, but they're not just the county and city. They're on a larger scale, as is metropolitan government. You talked about metropolitan Virginia. What is that? That's metropolitan Washington, D.C.? Because the recent election in Virginia showed the fact that the northern part of Virginia has become an urbanized corridor associated with northern Maryland and the area around Washington, D.C., and has there been any regional planning around that area, which is now very much part of Virginia? And you kept on using the word analysis, regional analysis is easy to do. But what about regional planning? What power do these units have in Virginia? I guess that's my question. What power do they have to really plan anything?
Well, our region, we developed, again, in the 60s and 70s, HUD and the federal agencies were funding regional planning. Our region developed a comprehensive plan that was a policy plan, and it coordinated the activities of the region, not unlike the Regional Plan Association. Now, in the case of Northern Virginia, the Washington metropolitan area is Washington, the Virginia suburbs, and the Maryland suburbs. So you have the Council of Governments, which is a multi-state region, but COG can't perform the Virginia functions, so there's the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, which coordinates Arlington, Fairfax, all of those counties.
Well, that's interesting.
Okay, so again, and that began in the 50s. If you look at Virginia's orientation to planning, it encouraged local government planning for industrial development. So planning was a means to get to economic growth. Now, Virginia being what it was, land use controls were, back, particularly. But along with when they created the planning district commissions in my part of the state, counties and cities hired their own planners so they wouldn't have to listen to the regional planners. And then the General Assembly in 1976 said that every county would have every city, county, town would have a planning commission. They needed a subdivision ordinance by 77, and they needed a comprehensive plan by 1980. Now, according to the last thing from the American Planning Association, only 22 states require something like a general or a comprehensive plan. So the state required the localities plan, and sort of elected officials initially are like, if they want something done and the plan agrees with it, fine. But if it doesn't, they attack the plan. Who made that plan? Well, over time, the citizens begin to own the plan. So if you want to do something, it has to be consistent with the plan. So again, I would offer people to look at what Virginia is and what it has done. And again, the rise in its economic status is not simply because of the Northern Virginia suburbs. There's a planning sophistication throughout the state, but it's a consequence of this planning district commission. And again, the term regional city was used for the Harrisonburg area. That, again, if you could, what the rural areas faced was the diseconomy of scale. So if you could get 100,000 people, you could hire one grant person, which the 10 local governments that range from 10,000 people to 30,000 people couldn't hire. So it became an ability to become more sophisticated about these things. And the local development, this was all coordinated with the local development districts of Appalachia and the economic development districts, because when they went to Washington, they talked to these agencies. So all these things work together. Now, the Department of Agriculture actually shifted their districts to match the planning districts, because that's where the local elected officials meet. That's where they converse, and they built the relationships and trust so they can do things cooperatively. So there's a lot there in Virginia and in other states. California has a lot of good regional councils. So I would really, as a practitioner here, I'm just saying, hey folks, take a look at this. I don't have the academic skills to do it, but you do, and there's something to see.